Some stories begin with glory. Jimmy Butler's began with a door closing. He was just a kid when his mother looked him in the eyes and said the words that would echo through his entire life. "I don't like the look of you. You have to go." Imagine that. 13 years old. No money. No plan. No safety net. Just the raw confusion of being unwanted in a world that never cared if he survived. Most kids his age worried about grades, games, friends, and school dances. Jimmy worried about where to sleep. He drifted from one couch to the next, one house to another. Some nights he crashed at a friend's place. Other nights, he just wondered, hoping morning would come faster than fear. This was not the life of a chosen one. This was not a childhood written for an NBA star. This was the beginning of a story nobody believed in. And yet, inside that chaos, something was forming. Something no one else could see. Not even Jimmy. A quiet fire. A stubborn refusal to die. A will built from pure survival. Pain was shaping him, not breaking him. Most people run from their trauma. Jimmy Butler grew up inside his. Every lesson he learned came from struggle. If he wanted clothes, he had to find them. If he wanted food, he had to hustle for it. If he wanted love, he had to learn how to stand alone first. No coach came to save him. No mentor came to lift him. No big-name scout delivered him hope. He was alone, but he learned something important in that darkness. Hard work beats privilege. Hunger beats talent. Pain sharpens the spirit. Jimmy never said these words out loud as a kid, but his life made him understand them. He never had a reason to believe he could become anything great, but he had one thing the world could not take, a heart that refused to surrender. Basketball was not his escape. It was his anchor. He wasn't playing to impress recruiters. He wasn't playing to get famous. He wasn't playing for crowds. He wasn't even playing for trophies. Basketball was simply the one place where life made sense. The one place where effort mattered. The one place where he could pour out everything he carried. All the abandonment. All the nights without a home. All the silence. All the hurt. He didn't play angry. He played hungry. There's a difference. But hunger does not guarantee recognition. Jimmy Butler was not a standout in high school. He wasn't the best player. He wasn't the biggest. He wasn't the kid with hype videos or reporters or recruiters filling his mailbox. He was overlooked, ignored. The boy no one expected to become anything. He averaged a modest stat line. Nothing special. Nothing that shouted, "This kid is a future." Coaches looked past him. Scouts didn't write his name. Most people forgot he existed the moment he stepped off the court. But the people who succeed in life are not always the ones the world chooses. Sometimes they are the ones the world rejects. Jimmy was not chosen, but he was forged. With no offers, no real path, and nothing to fall back on, he went somewhere most future NBA stars never touch. Junior college. Tyler Junior College. A place where dreams go when the world thinks they are already dead. Most players go to JUCO because they failed somewhere else. Jimmy went because nobody gave him a chance anywhere else. He arrived there with the simplest goal in the world. Work harder than everybody. Outlast everybody. Earn every inch. This wasn't confidence. This was survival training. He woke up early. Stayed late. Outran players who were more gifted. Outworked players who were more talented. Outfocused players who had easier lives. Because Jimmy had something they didn't. He knew what it felt like to have nothing. And when you come from nothing, you fight differently. You don't practice for fun. You practice for your future. You practice because every drill feels like a step away from the homelessness you escaped. You practice because losing means falling back into the life that almost swallowed you. He didn't train like a prospect. He trained like a survivor. And slowly, very slowly, people started to notice. Not because of highlight plays. Not because of flashy moves, but because Jimmy refused to break. Every drill, every sprint, every moment. If pain came, he welcomed it. If pressure arrived, he stood tall. If he failed, he returned the next day with twice the effort. He was becoming something the world had not seen in a long time. A man built entirely out of willpower. His work earned him a chance at Marquette. A real school, a real program, a real shot. But once again, nobody expected much from him. He wasn't the star. He wasn't the future. He wasn't the face of the team. He was invisible. Again. But the universe is a strange rhythm. It respects those who endure. Jimmy didn't care about roles. He didn't care about popularity. He didn't care about expectations. He cared about work. Marquette was where the fire inside him began to take shape, where the homeless kid became a warrior, where the abandoned boy became a leader, where the overlooked player became the toughest presence in the gym. Every practice was a battleground. Every challenge was an opportunity. Every struggle reminded him of where he came from and where he refused to return. Coaches started noticing his mindset. Teammates respected his edge. People began to say the thing no one had ever said about Jimmy Butler before. This kid is different. But difference is not destiny. Not yet. And the world still didn't trust him. He reached the point every underdog reaches. The moment where the journey could rise or collapse. The NBA draft. But Jimmy wasn't a headline. He wasn't a top pick. He wasn't a projected superstar. He waited, and waited, and waited. 30 players taken before him. 30 players chosen while he sat in silence. 30 reminders that the world still didn't believe in him. But then, finally, with a 30th overall pick, the Chicago Bulls called his name. Jimmy Butler, the kid nobody wanted. The kid who slept on couches. The kid the world ignored. He made it. But reaching the NBA wasn't the finish line. It was the start of a new fight. Because the moment he arrived, he faced doubt all over again. Doubted in practice. Doubted in minutes. Doubted in potential. The league tried to tell him who he was. A role player. A defender. A backup. Nothing more. They thought they could box him in. They thought they could define him. They thought the struggle would finally break him. But Jimmy Butler knew something they didn't. The world had been trying to break him since he was 13. And he was still standing. Still fighting. Still climbing. Still hungry. Because pain didn't destroy him. Pain built him. And now, he was ready to show the world what pain had created. But the real transformation, the moment Jimmy Butler would become a symbol of toughness, the moment he would rise, dominate, lead, and silence every doubt. That part of the story is still ahead. And when it comes, the world will finally understand. The boy they tried to break became the man they could never stop. The NBA is a dream for millions, but a battlefield for the few who enter it. Jimmy Butler arrived not as a star, not as a chosen one, but as a question mark. 30 teams looked past him until one finally called his name. And even then, the message was clear. You're here, but you're not expected to matter. Most first-round picks come in with cameras, analysts, hype, and headlines. Jimmy arrived with silence. No spotlight. No celebration. Just the same thing he had since he was 13. Doubt. But he was used to that. In fact, he was fueled by it. Chicago welcomed him. But the league didn't. On his first practices, he was slower than guards, smaller than forwards, and less skilled than scorers. He wasn't the most athletic. Wasn't the fastest, wasn't the flashiest. He was the guy who passed the ball, set screens, sat on the bench, clapped for others. He barely played his rookie year. Some nights, he didn't play at all. And when he did, he made mistakes. Turnovers, bad reads, poor spacing, rookie errors. Fans shrugged, analysts doubted, critics dismissed. Another role player, another maybe. Another forgettable name shuffled into the background of NBA history. But here's the thing the world always forgets. You cannot break someone who has already survived their breaking point. And Jimmy Butler had lived through things much harsher than a bad game, much colder than a benching, much heavier than criticism, compared to homelessness, compared to sleeping on couches, compared to being unwanted. This was nothing. This was easy. Jimmy approached the league with the same mentality he used to survive life. If you give me 1 inch, I'm taking the whole court. If you give me 1 moment, I'm turning it into a lifetime. If you doubt me, thank you. That's fuel. While other players spent off days relaxing, Jimmy spent his in the gym, shooting until his arms burned, running until his legs trembled, defending until his lungs begged him to stop. He ignored the pain. He embraced it. He understood something most players didn't. Pain was not his enemy. Pain was his teacher. Pain turned boys into warriors. And Jimmy Butler wanted to become something the NBA had never seen. A star built entirely out of work. His teammates noticed at first. The way he showed up earlier than the rookies. The way he stayed longer than the veterans. The way he treated every practice like a playoff game. He didn't complain about minutes. Didn't complain about touches. Didn't complain about roles. He simply worked. Worked like the gym was oxygen and everything outside of it was drowning. And then, slowly, the tide began to turn. He started getting minutes. Then more, and more. But it wasn't because of offense. It was because of defense. Jimmy Butler became a shadow, a nightmare, a defender who followed you everywhere, fought through every screen, pressed every inch of space, made even superstars uncomfortable. He wasn't trying to be liked. He was trying to be respected. Every assignment he got, he treated like a message from the universe. Kobe tonight. LeBron tonight. Harden tonight. Prove you belong. And he did, night after night, battle after battle, possession after possession. The homeless kid from Tumul, Texas became the defensive engine of the Chicago Bulls. But that was just the beginning. Because once he mastered defense, once he proved he belonged in the league, he set his eyes on something bigger, becoming a star. There's a moment in every underdog's journey where the world realizes something shocking. This guy is not going away. Jimmy reached that moment in his fourth season. He didn't wait his turn. He took it. Every summer, he transformed. More muscle, more skill, better shooting, smarter reads, sharper footwork, stronger mindset. He came back each season as a new version of himself. He was not rising. He was evolving. And the league couldn't keep up. He went from backup to starter. Starter to defensive anchor. Anchor to leading scorer. Leading scorer to all-star. All-star to franchise player. The climb was not smooth. It was violent. Filled with critics saying he wasn't good enough. Filled with media saying he wasn't built to lead. Filled with teammates who didn't understand his intensity. Filled with front offices who didn't believe in his ceiling. But Jimmy never cared about ceilings. He cared about floors. Because he came from the bottom. And once you rise from nothing, fear does not exist. Excuses do not exist. Comfort does not exist. What exists is hunger. Pure hunger. And hunger always wins. He wasn't the most talented. Wasn't the most gifted. Didn't come in with hype. What he had was harder to measure. Harder to grade. Harder to teach. Grit. Fire. Stubbornness. Conviction. Work ethic sharp enough to cut steel. Jimmy Butler became the guy who wasn't afraid of pressure. He ran toward it. The guy who wasn't afraid of difficult games. He demanded them. The guy who wasn't afraid of responsibility. He embraced it. Every team he joined, he changed the culture. Every locker room he entered, he raised the standard. Every teammate he played with, he pushed, sometimes too hard, but always from a place of belief. He didn't want to be liked. He wanted to win. And anyone who didn't match his fire felt it. He clashed in Chicago, clashed in Minnesota, clashed in Philadelphia. And people said the same thing again and again. He's too intense. He's too demanding. He's too hard to play with. But very few understood the truth. Jimmy Butler wasn't difficult. He was built different. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing greatness. He wasn't chasing validation. He was chasing purpose. He wasn't chasing comfort. He was chasing the version of himself he knew he could become. The world saw a problem, but champions saw a leader. And that's why one franchise made the move that would redefine Jimmy's legacy forever. A franchise that needed toughness. A franchise that needed heart. A franchise that needed someone who didn't fear the grind. The Miami Heat. The perfect storm. And when Jimmy arrived, something inside him clicked. He wasn't here to fit in. He was here to ignite an empire. Miami gave him the environment he'd been waiting his entire life to find. A place where work was sacred. Where toughness was a standard. Where suffering was embraced, not avoided. Where hunger wasn't seen as too much. It was seen as a minimum. Heat culture wasn't built for everyone, but it was built for him. Jimmy found his people. And in that environment, the world finally saw the version of Jimmy that had been brewing since childhood. Not just a defender, not just a survivor, Not just the underdog, but the warrior, the leader, the superstar. This was where the legendary stories began. The bubble, the comebacks, the epic playoff moments, the 50-point explosions, the fearless shots, the impossible performances, the nights where he carried his team on sheer willpower. But before those historic battles, before the world called him Playoff Jimmy, before he became the face of toughness, he had to endure one final transformation, one last trial, one challenge bigger than any he had faced before, a moment where his past, his pain, and his purpose collided, a moment that would define him forever. And that moment is where his true legend begins. Miami, Heat culture, a system most players fear, but one Jimmy Butler was born for. Other players saw discipline. Jimmy saw home. Other players saw pressure. Jimmy saw purpose. Other players saw pain. Jimmy saw power. It wasn't an adjustment for him. It was a reunion with a version of himself he had been forging since childhood. The kid who survived abandonment. The teen who outworked everyone in junior college. The man who refused every label the league tried to pin on him. Miami didn't try to change Jimmy Butler. They unleashed him. Training camp in Miami is legendary. Players throw up. Players quit. Players break. The hardwood becomes a graveyard for weak habits. But Jimmy smiled. While others gasped for air, he pushed harder. While others bent over in exhaustion, he stood tall. While others feared the pain, he welcomed it like an old friend. Jimmy believed something most people never dared to understand. Discomfort builds destiny. Suffering builds strength. Pain builds champions. Heat culture didn't intimidate him. It reflected him. And once he stepped into that environment, the transformation began. The league was about to witness a dangerous combination. Jimmy's past, Miami's culture, and a hunger that refused to die. The first season brought whispers, then warning signs, then explosions of brilliance. But it wasn't until the NBA bubble that Jimmy Butler became something more than a star. He became a force, a presence, a storm that could tilt the entire league with nothing but willpower. Because the bubble stripped away everything: crowds, distractions, travel, noise. There were no fans, no momentum swings, no outside energy, just raw basketball, just heart versus heart, will versus will, soul versus soul. And in that environment, pure, silent, unforgiving, the players with the strongest internal fire would rise. No excuses, no shortcuts, no hiding. And who in the league had more internal fire than Jimmy Butler? No one. When the playoffs began, Miami wasn't expected to go far. They weren't favored. They weren't feared. They weren't seen as a threat. But Jimmy knew better. He had lived his whole life being underestimated. He had turned doubt into fuel for years. This was nothing new. And so the Heat entered the bubble as underdogs. But they walked out of each round as something else. Believers. Jimmy wasn't just playing basketball. He was dragging his team, possession by possession, with a hunger the league hadn't seen in years. He beat the Pacers. He beat the Bucks, Johnnies and all. He beat the Celtics. He fought through every challenge with the same message. We don't run from pressure. We run at it. Every practice, every huddle, every timeout, Jimmy brought a level of fire that felt contagious. He wasn't asking for effort. He was demanding it. And players followed because they felt the truth in his voice. Jimmy didn't want to be a star. He wanted to be a warrior. And when the Heat reached the finals, something nobody predicted, the world paused. And then came the moment, the one that defined him, the one burned into NBA history. Game 3. Miami was down 2-0. Their players were injured. Their odds were microscopic. The Lakers were stacked. LeBron and AD looked unstoppable. The Heat were supposed to fold. They were supposed to disappear. They were supposed to accept defeat. But Jimmy Butler knew that story too well. The world telling him he couldn't win. People expecting him to fail. Life daring him to break. He didn't break at 13. He wasn't breaking now. When he stepped onto the court for Game 3, something was different. His eyes were calm. His walk was controlled. His energy was sharp, focused, almost terrifying. He didn't need a speech. He didn't need a pep talk. He knew what he had to do. And then he delivered one of the greatest performances in finals history. 40 points, 11 rebounds, 13 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. But the numbers don't tell the story. What tells the story is a look on LeBron's face when Jimmy stared him down. What tells the story is a way Jimmy refused to fade, refused to slow, refused to surrender. What tells the story is a final moment, him leaning over the scorer's table, completely spent, drenched in sweat, oxygen barely reaching his lungs. Not because he was weak, but because he had given everything he had inside him. All the trauma, all the anger, all the hunger, all the nights without a home, all the years of doubt, all the pain that shaped him. He poured it all onto the court. He didn't play that game for glory. He played it for every version of himself that the world tried to erase. And that was the night the entire world met someone new. Not Jimmy Butler, but playoff Jimmy. The man who appears when pressure becomes unbearable. The man who rises when everyone else collapses. The man who carries his team not with talent, but with pure heart. But even the bubble wasn't the peak. His final performances were legendary. His mindset was elite. His leadership was unmatched. But his story was still far from over. Because Jimmy Butler wasn't done proving people wrong. Wasn't done shaking the league. Wasn't done rewriting expectations. The bubble showed the world what he was capable of. But the years after, the comebacks, the upsets, the historic playoff runs, the injury battles, the impossible shots, the moments where he single-handedly destroyed entire contenders. Those years turned him from a great player into a symbol of what hunger can do, a symbol of what toughness looks like, a symbol of what it means to refuse excuses, refuse weakness, refuse doubt. Jimmy Butler became the player young athletes watch when they feel invisible, the player grinders study when they want to understand heart, the player underdogs look to when the world says they are not enough. Because Jimmy proved something powerful. You don't need privilege. You don't need hype. You don't need perfect circumstances. You don't need praise. You need hunger. You need discipline. You need pain turned into purpose. Jimmy Butler became the walking definition of that truth. But little did the world know. His most unbelievable moment, his most shocking playoff run, his most fearless performance, his most heroic comeback, was still ahead, and it would come when the world counted him out again. When people said, "He's finished. He's too old. He can't do it anymore. He missed his chance." The world would doubt him one more time, and Jimmy would answer in a way that shook the entire NBA, because the man the world tried to break was about to show them all exactly how unbreakable he really is. There comes a point in every athlete's journey where the world decides they are done, not because the athlete has actually fallen off, but because the world gets tired of waiting for their breakthrough. Jimmy Butler reached that point. Year after year, the Heat got close but not close enough. Close to a championship. Close to the finish line. Close to the moment Jimmy had been grinding toward since childhood. But close is the cruelest word for a man who gives everything. And when Miami lost the finals, then fell short again and again, whispers turned into debates. Debates turned into doubts. And doubts turned into disrespect. He had his chance. He missed it. He'll never win a ring. His past is peak. His good, but not that guy. People forgot who they were talking about. They forgot this was the kid abandoned at 13. The kid who slept on couches. The kid who wasn't supposed to make varsity, college, or the NBA. The kid who survived being unwanted in lifelong before he was unwanted in sports. Doubt didn't scare Jimmy. Doubt motivated Jimmy. Every year the critics spoke louder. His workouts got harder. His focus got sharper. His hunger grew larger. Jimmy Butler's story doesn't begin on a court. It begins in chaos. A small boy in Texas, standing in a house that never felt like home, watching the people he trusted walk away one by one. He was abandoned before he even understood what the word meant. First his father. Then, at 13, his mother looked him in the eyes and told him the words that could break any child. "I don't like the look of you. You need to leave." And just like that, he was on the streets. Jimmy wasn't just homeless. He was unwanted, unclaimed, a kid drifting from couch to couch, night to night, trying to stay invisible so the world didn't swallow him whole. But here's the part that people misunderstand. Jimmy wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for purpose. And he found it in a dusty basketball, one that didn't even bounce right. He found it in cracked asphalt and rusty hoops. He found it in silence, the silence of being alone, the silence of being overlooked, the silence that became his training partner. Basketball didn't save him. He used basketball to save himself. Jimmy said something once that explains his entire life. You can't measure heart. Because heart doesn't come from privilege. Heart doesn't come from comfort. Heart is forged in fire, and Jimmy Butler had been living in fire his entire childhood. He figured out something most people never understand. Hunger beats talent when talent gets comfortable. Pain sharpens you if you refuse to let it weaken you. Hard work destroys excuses. So he worked, not in fancy gyms, not with private trainers, not with crowds cheering. He worked in the quiet, in the dark, in the places where weak mindsets die and tough spirits are created. People doubted him in high school. They told him he wasn't athletic enough, not skilled enough, not special enough. Jimmy never tried to prove them wrong. He trained to prove himself right. He didn't get the big offers. He ended up in a small junior college, a place nobody talks about, a league where dreams usually go to die quietly. But instead, Jimmy grew louder. He turned himself into something coaches couldn't overlook. Not because he was naturally gifted, but because he outworked every person who breathed the same air as him. Then came Marquette, another place full of critics, another level where he was told he'd reached his ceiling. But Jimmy didn't come from ceilings. He came from floors, from rock bottom. And when you come from the bottom, every inch upward is fuel. The NBA didn't want Jimmy, either. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't a highlight machine. He wasn't the next big anything. He was drafted dead last in the first round. To most players, that's an insult. To Jimmy, it was oxygen. He told himself, if you count me out, I'll count myself in. As a rookie, he barely played. No spotlight, no support, no promises. But Jimmy had a superpower nobody saw coming. He embraced suffering. He embraced the grind. He embraced being underestimated. When everyone else used lack of opportunity as an excuse, Jimmy used it as motivation. When others complained about minutes, Jimmy trained for hours. When stars rested, Jimmy sharpened his hunger. Slowly, his name began to rise, not because he was chosen, but because he refused to disappear. He became a defensive nightmare, a relentless worker, a leader who didn't talk about effort. He showed it. And then something incredible happened. People began to fear him, respect him, follow him. Jimmy Butler became the symbol of toughness in the NBA, proof that discipline, hunger, and heart can build a giant from scratch. Jimmy's story is not about talent. It's about choice. He didn't have money. He didn't have stability. He didn't have a family cheering for him. He didn't have privileged connections or a perfect start. What he had was a fire. And every person hearing his story has that same fire, buried under fear, doubt, procrastination, excuses, distractions, and a belief that success is for special people. Jimmy Butler is living proof. Success isn't for the chosen. Success is for the disciplined. Success is for the hungry. Success is for the ones who decide to grow anyway, even when life gives them every reason not to. So whether you're young or old, strong or weak, whether you've been abandoned, discouraged, overlooked, underestimated, whether you failed 100 times or haven't even started because you're afraid, let Jimmy's journey burn in your mind. You don't need perfect circumstances. You don't need easy beginnings. You don't need people believing in you. All you need is discipline, humility, work ethic, willingness to learn, respect for the grind, and the courage to challenge your own mindset. The world tried to break him. Life tried to erase him. People tried to ignore him, but Jimmy Butler didn't collapse. He transformed. He turned trauma into fuel, pain into purpose, hardship into hunger. And you can do the same. You don't become unstoppable by being lucky. You become unstoppable by refusing to quit. If Jimmy Butler can rise from abandonment, homelessness, and being counted out by everyone, then you, right now, have every reason to rise too. Let this be the story that wakes something up inside you. Let this be the story that reminds you, you are not too late. You are not too weak. You are not too broken. You are not done. Success isn't for privilege. It's for the persistent. And that means it's for you.